Okay, so this chat is going to be about media misrepresentation. We're with Dr. Aegean Chan, dermatologist, dermatopathologist, Gloria and Victoria from Chemist Confessions, who are cosmetic chemists and brand founders, Nikki, who is an amazing influencer. I love the stats that you put on your feed, and then Esther Ulu, who is also a cosmetic chemist. So the first question that I'm going to ask: what are some of the current issues of media misreporting that you've seen?
I think I'll try to repeat what I said earlier on. One of the initial questions you asked, Jen, was just about what we're seeing on our own individual feeds in terms of questions from consumers about sunscreen safety specifically. I've seen a ton of questions in my DMs and on any sunscreen post that I've created in the last 2 weeks with consumers rightfully concerned about sunscreen safety and chemical sunscreens. And I've seen a lot of comments about how, we should just be not using sunscreen altogether. We need vitamin D. It gets absorbed into your bloodstream. Just so much misinformation permeating on social media. And I think this is also propelled by mainstream organizations and media outlets like CNN and New York Times, who are creating sensational content around benzene and using terms like cancer causing and things like that. So yeah, a big issue I think in our space right now, and I'm happy to talk about it.
And Esther, let's try this again. Would you like to go next?
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. For me, I've been seeing like a lot of fear about like J&J, that they're killing people with all the news regarding benzene, sunscreens, their recall, and then what happened about a month ago with the DMD, Hydantoin, and OGX, and then that's being linked to what happened with the baby powder, and it's just causing like a lot of fear and a lot of confusion for people. And also, I said earlier how on Twitter, I want to say this about 2 weeks ago or so, Tony uploaded a picture with somebody that put various oils on their back and two broad spectrum SPFs, and that post blew up on Twitter. It was a huge debate about how oils are enough protection, that they're considered sunscreens, and it was just a mess. So it's all linking back to like sunscreen and killing people, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a lot going on.
And Julia Ruby, I believe you gave this suggestion that I should prevent people from being able to come to the stage freely. I think I did that. I think I figured it out. So here's hoping. Aegean, would you like to go next?
Yes, so I agree. I've been getting a lot of concerns, rightfully so, from consumers with, concerns regarding the sunscreens they have in their medicine cabinet, especially with the sensationalist headlines. Say Neutrogena is recalling. So if you have any Neutrogena sunscreen, you get concerned. And I think it's a very complex and nuanced topic that the mainstream media, trusted news sources like CNN, MSNBC, even the New York Times are simplifying, I think, a little bit too much and not getting into the nuances of exposure, levels of exposure. Michelle at Lab Muffin actually did a really good reel in 15 seconds, and she was able to explain how the levels of benzene found in sunscreens in the Valley Shore experiment are actually so low that they're very unlikely. The exposure is so low that you're very unlikely to develop cancer just from exposure to the levels of, one bottle of sunscreen or, two. So I think there's been a lot of sensationalist misinformation floating around there. And then there's been this overreaction by consumers saying, well, I'm not going to use sunscreen, it kills you. I'm going to just use coconut oil instead. And that's really, really scary to see, because we do know that sunscreens do prevent skin cancer and coconut oil does not. So it's been really dismaying to see what a poor job the media has done in communicating the actual risks to people.
Gloria, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sunscreen is definitely the hottest topic in our community as well. I do want to add that I think while we do get people who are kind of lost and concerned by all the fear-mongering headlines that they see, we find that our followers are people that aren't necessarily the ones that's gonna fall for that anyway. So sometimes it feels like, at least sometimes I feel a little helpless. Like, oh, like in our community, it's like an echo chamber. People are in the know, and they will dig a little deeper than just the headlines. But we know that out there, it's becoming more and more mainstream to just throw ingredients under the bus. And in the case of sunscreen, a whole very important category of products down in under the bus. So it's very concerning.
And last but not least, Victoria.
Yeah, don't have too much more to add other than it is generally frustrating, and it feels like everything has come to a climax, especially in this summer, just with not even that, but also with the PFAS scare as well. So I like Gloria's positive tone and silver lining and all of this is that generally it does give us hope that our followers they don't tend to fall prey to the knee-jerk reaction too much. But at the same time, we recently did a podcast, looking and where we kind of like combed through some of the headlines. And when you have like the New York Times, even the Wall Street Journal making some sensationalized headlines that really do incite a lot of fear and mistrust, it is very disheartening. And it just feels like our jobs as psychoms and science communicators will just never end at this point. So yeah.
And you guys said a lot of really interesting things that I'd like to hit on throughout this conversation. And just to highlight what you just said, Victoria, something that drives me up the wall in Canada, we have a media agency that's taxpayer funded. This is what drives me crazy. If anyone else, whatever, but these are my tax dollars. And then the headlines that they had for, just for example, the PFAS stuff, hidden forever toxins found in sunscreen. That was the headline on the National, which is broadcasted to, I don't know, millions at least. A lot of people watch this, and so it's really disheartening to see that kind of content. And then what makes me more frustrated is when then I go see who they're actually citing for some of these pieces. For that specific piece, they cited she was a beauty blogger, nothing wrong with that, but she didn't have, I don't even think she had a scientific background, certainly not a relevant background. So I think that's really challenging a lot of the times for these pieces. Something that I kept saying, I mentioned this in the last time we tried this question. I kept seeing for the benzene stuff, I kept seeing a dermatologist being the first person that journalists reach out to. I mean, a beauty blogger is maybe a step lower than a dermatologist, obviously has expertise in this topic, but maybe not specifically in benzene. So sometimes journalists aren't really sure who to go to, and then they feature the wrong experts, and then this like false dichotomy for information is incredibly confusing to the general public, I think. And I think it's sowing a lot of distrust, because then the other thing, maybe I'll add to this, outside of the sunscreen conversation, I'm frequently cited on the topic of sustainability and cosmetics. And then alongside me, there are all these people from like, not necessarily the EWG, but oftentimes the EWG that are saying like the opposite of what I'm saying, but what they're saying is factually incorrect. So then it seems like, oh, there's this one person that says this thing, and there's this other person that says this other thing, but when what they're saying is just not scientifically sound. And so it's just very confusing to the general public, I think. But speaking of dermatologists, Aegean, would you like to go first for this question?
Sure. So as I was saying before, in medicine or in life in general, there is a range of expertise even within a category. So there are many dermatologists that have even subspecialty expertise. They only do nails. They only do skin cancer surgery, like my husband, or they only see kids. And I think that can be really difficult to tease out by the layperson, the non-medical layperson. Even, somebody in a different specialty can have trouble teasing that out. And, I think that physicians in general have given off this impression that we're all knowing, which is really nice and flattering, but we're all still human and we all have our specific area of expertise. So, for us, we do have to take basic sciences in undergrad, some chemistry courses, organic chemistry. But in medical school, we really don't get much of that. It's more clinical sciences. If you ask me how a patient's going to react to a medication, that's my expertise. And I think that, a piece that's also missing in science literacy in general is knowing what these different types of training are and what it means to be a physician and what that expertise entails. So kind of that's my long way around by saying that, it's really not our wheelhouse to have a deep dive into toxicology. I do have some physician friends that have gone specifically down subspecialty training routes that do include toxicology, and those are the people that I would ask. Or I would ask, Michelle, or Anki, I know that is their expertise. And I think that, I think it can be difficult to turn down a PR opportunity, to be honest. And, I think that some professionals in my field don't necessarily know when to say no to something that may not be in their wheelhouse. And I think that's the case in many fields. Jen, you and I are friends because I always defer when I know it's not in my wheelhouse. But I think there's some people that don't necessarily do that. And that's where, reporters and things can get the wrong impression and put information out there that can be misinterpreted or is blatantly incorrect.
Oh, Gian, I think that's such a good point. And I so agree with you. And I think that this is probably important to the conversation because journalists are the general public too. So they follow for the same kind of things that everyone else does. But I find, a few things here. So people think that people who have larger platforms must have more expertise. There's one side. So then these people who have very large platforms also, not only that, they're the ones that they'll be seen by the journalists because they may be following them. But then on the flip side, I find that some people are really thirsty to get a very big platform and they maybe this is maybe a pessimistic statement, but maybe care more about being famous than putting out accurate information. And so then they don't necessarily turn down things that they have no expertise in, and then they want to be the first to publish on things that they just don't really know what they're talking about. And then again, to this conversation, it just kind of sows distrust. I don't know if you want to chime in any more to what I've just said before I move on to the next person.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that I think it makes it hard for dermatologists that do their due diligence, that before speaking on a topic, making sure I'm actually getting it right, that I'm talking to colleagues that I know that definitely have a very strong understanding of toxicology and principles that dictate what certain things mean and what data means and have a correct interpretation of that. And I think, that can be frustrating because people will say, well, this dermatologist said this. And, this topic kind of comes up around, I've seen this recently around chemical sunscreens and pregnancy. And it's kind of like a bee in my bonnet because a lot of dermatologists are saying you shouldn't use chemical sunscreens in pregnancy. There is no data to support that. There are no studies that have shown there's fetal harm from chemical sunscreens. And, this has kind of come up in comments that you and I have kind of been on together. And it really frustrates me because I don't want to undermine my colleagues, but at the same time, I feel like it's our responsibility to disseminate information that's truthful and accurate. And, so I think, we kind of all have our own platforms. And unfortunately, I feel like some people really lean hard into the clean and natural, kind of the goop dermatologist. I don't have to name names, but I think that like once it becomes a brand, you kind of lean hard and kind of say things that may not be necessarily accurate, even though you are technically a medical professional, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if people maybe like convince themselves of certain truths and then just forget how to be critical when it's something a
Yeah,
little bit outside of their lane. I feel like I could talk to you
right.
about this for a long
Yes.
time, but
We could do a dedicated talk on this for sure.
Esther, do you want to chime in next?
I think I was really just gonna say something that Agent said earlier about how people see dermatologists as like the no op people and whatever. And I think what really hit me was as soon as the whole benzene controversy started, that's like the first thing that happened months ago was that I saw derms like posting within like minutes as soon as they posted on I think it's called the Dermatology Times if I'm not mistaken. I saw people posting in minutes and even saying that that the sunscreens were recalled when
Oh,
at the time it wasn't true. So and we know that some consumers look to dermatologists as like the know-it-all people, and if it caused even more fear than it really should have. And people were just like, oh, has my sunscreen been recalled? When clearly the FDA didn't issue any recalls at that time because it just happened. So I think I just feel like there should be some type of vetting when it comes to posting information. And I agree with what you both said earlier. It's like really frustrating when we see let's for example the toxicologist that was in the Balasher report, how his words got misinterpreted and how he pretty much has to clarify in like the Washington, I think it was the Washington Post or Washington Journal article if I'm not mistaken. And then but we see other people that don't have the toxicology expertise speaking on it and saying there's really no safe level of benzene when it's really hard to avoid. So it's really frustrating. That's pretty much like what I'm going to leave it at.
Victoria, would you like to go next?
Sure. I guess like listening to everyone talk, I have this like Cora and I call it like tinfoil hat theory, but just kind of a out there theory that maybe just headlines and science just really oppose each other because at the end of the day, headlines are all about like hot takes. They need things instantly. And, Gore and I have worked with PR teams before, and everything needs to happen immediately. There's like editors, people, writers, they need an answer to get the news out there as fast as possible. And sadly, like a lot of things that do take some science and research, anything that needs time to digest, it just doesn't work like that, and it really goes against like just mulling over, the complexity of topics. And so I this is a depressing statement, but I don't know if this will ever change. I think there will always like media is media. They're all their goal is to get a reaction, to get a click. But I guess in some ways, like just gotta keep trying to do the research for readers who are willing to take the time out to understand, who do like find doubt maybe in like, hey, putting coconut oil on my skin doesn't sound quite right. So yeah, those are just my thoughts, random thoughts.
I just wanted to add to something that Aegean and I were talking about earlier because I was just reminded of it for whatever reason. But for my podcast, I get people reaching out to me constantly and they want to come on my podcast. Victoria and Gloria, do you guys have this too? But they have like a PR person who's just like sending like feelers to anyone who has like a platform relevant to what they're trying to post. I find it very odd when it's dermatologists who are doing this or other physicians who are doing this. Um, uh, yeah, I find it very odd that they're doing this. It strikes me that maybe they're not going to be that reputable if they care so much to try to get in the media.
You mean you find it like weird that dermatologists are trying to like push themselves out there.
Well, it's not necessarily them, it's their PR person, but they have a PR person that wants to get them on all these different platforms to be famous.
So
That's
I have a
ultimately what they're
secret
doing.
to tell you. I have a secret to tell you guys. That it's super common for especially New York or like big city dermatologists to have PR people. It's a super common thing. So any big dermatologist that has a big practice in the city, you pretty much have a PR person in order to compete. So,
oh, wow.
you know, people, you know, the more media placement you get, then the more it's basically a tool to get patients into your practice.
But don't you guys have an issue with having too many patients and not being able to? I don't know the dynamic of dermatologists in the United States. In Canada, like, people can't get in to see dermatologists because there's so few dermatologists to the amount of people who want to go and see them. Do you not have that?
So it's very region specific. So unfortunately, like places like Manhattan and New York have a saturation of dermatologists. So basically anywhere where it's lovely to live, you have too many dermatologists. So you're fighting for patients. And a lot of these practices are more focused on aesthetics. So the more patients, the better, really. Whereas like the dermatologists in Canada are probably mostly seeing people for medical issues. And so that's where there's like a real disconnect, I think.
Interesting.
But I know some dermatologists, like even like academic institutions have PR departments for their physicians. So even not dermatologists, but like OBs, like people in other specialties, they use these PR placements, like local news placements, as a way to advertise, essentially, like build up your credibility so people want to come see you. It's kind of gross. I agree. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it just makes me feel, sorry to say this, it makes me feel kind of happy to be in Canada that we don't have this. Yeah, sorry to say that. But Gloria, do you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, I don't know why I'm so positive today, but well, I agree with Victoria. Between the two of us, we talk about this a lot. That we don't think the clickbaity headlines going away, and it's just a problem that we in the modern society is gonna have to deal with. I feel like, but I do feel like of the journalists and media we've interacted with, I do generally think that they're trying. You know, Jen, I think what you said about how you're very frustrated by being placed next to a EWG comment, and I get that, but at the same time, it's just like a poor little journalist who may not know so much about the topic. They feel like, oh, okay, I guess I have to like present it from all sides, you know. But I do think the more they talk. We've also interacted with journalists that ask us a million questions beyond what the piece calls for, really trying to learn more and trying to present things more fairly or from a more scientific angle. And I do think it comes down to, at the end of the day, maybe it comes down to consumer education. I think we have moved away a little bit from the days of, you know, any doctor or any PhD is an expert in everything under the sun. People are slowly starting to see their different fields, different expertise, and different specialties. It just, you know, we're not quite there yet, but maybe it is slowly changing. You know, hopefully we'll get to a place where a podiatrist can, you know, be the skincare expert in the near future. So yeah.
And last but not least, Nikki.
Can you hear me, Jen?
I can hear you now.
Okay, it wasn't working before. A lot of great comments already from the group. The only thing that I would say, and just from the consumer perspective here, is to me, it just sounds like the only solution really is for experts to turn down those PR opportunities that don't align with the scope or area of their expertise. And I know that probably is a solution that's like it may not happen, because I think I read something somewhere and it rings true for me, and I think for everyone on this call probably is the reality is that derms, just like anybody else, are not immune to wanting likes and growth on social media. That's why you're on there. So I think that social media rewards being the first to comment on something or share share the news. So I think that it's a challenging issue, and all we can do really is, as consumers, know what the different expertise are and what the scope of a dermatologist is versus a toxicologist or a chemist, and for dermatologists to really turn down those opportunities for PR that just don't align with their knowledge base. So yeah.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation a number of times on my podcast with different journalists. First, I had it with the ladies over at the Breaking Beauty podcast, and another time I had it with Nadine Baggett or Baggett. Baggett? Somebody needs to correct me how to say her last name, because I'm not super sure. Feel free to send me a voice memo if you're not in this call and you don't know how to say her last name. But anyways, we were talking about the dynamic in the media of fast and free. This is what everyone is expecting more and more, to have free content. People aren't buying subscriptions. Now media is reliant on advertisers. Then they have to make sure their content is okay with their advertisers. They need to get content out really fast. So the accuracy kind of goes by the wayside, because who can post Caroline Higgins, I believe that's her last name. She was talking about how she went from doing like one article a week to like 5 or something, like something obscene, and who could possibly keep up with putting out accurate content. And then also, not only do they have to produce more content, they also, because nobody wants to pay for content like they used to before journalism used to be like a viable career, you still weren't paid that much, but now good luck, I guess, being a journalist and having that as your full-time career. I commend anyone who does that, because it's very, very hard to make a living in today's media world. So yeah, there's all of these issues, and I totally get it. And then also what consumers are looking for, like we have a negativity bias. So obviously magazines want to cater to what people actually want to click: negative information and bold headlines. We also don't really want to see the nuance. Who really cares that shampoos are actually safe? People want to see that bold headline. Maybe they'll put a little bit of nuance in the body of the post. But another really scary thing that I've seen, I forget the actual stat, but I read something about American literacy, but worldwide it's not that much different. That most people have a reading literacy of around grade 8 or lower. So most people aren't literate enough to read the whole body of the post, and they'll just read the title of the posts. So how do you contend with that? But I guess my question here, because I don't know if there's a better way in light of what the dynamics currently are, that consumers want free content, so advertisement has to pay for the content. How do you move away from that? But then also, who's accountable? Big picture question, but what do you guys think? And Nikki, do you want to go first for this one? Or Aegean, I see your mic's off. Do you want to go first for this one?
Oh, I just had a comment about this. I think the commercialization of social media, I think, incentivizes what I'm seeing with physicians to do ads and to maybe take PR opportunities that are outside of their wheelhouse. And, it's because the source of their funding is this popularity, right? So that's an inherent bias and conflict of interest. But I think on one of your first season podcasts, you're talking to either Tim Caulfield or that Canadian science communicator that's amazing, Scott something.
Jonathan Jerry.
Yeah, Jonathan Jerry.
He's great.
And it just got me thinking about, academic institutions should be funding more of these positions. So I know Austin Chang is a physician who does a lot of social media, and he's actually paid by his institution to do this work. So I think if institutions actually funded physicians to put out accurate information. And I think a lot of people have done a good job, with COVID, and trying to raise public awareness using social media channels, but doing the same thing for general science literacy and health topics, and kind of de-incentivizing, having to do advertisements for commercial entities, I think would be a positive way. And I think ultimately it comes down to giving consumers the tools to kind of ascertain, like, this seems fishy. I know what sources are accurate. Let me go check those sources instead. And that's what I try to do, is try to give people, the tools and say, the American Academy of Dermatology, that's a good resource. Dermat NZ, that's a good resource. And try to give people the tools rather than just, give them information to blindly follow.
Valeria, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think maybe it's the world we live in. Like you said, Jen, who's got time to read full article? Honestly, like in fields that we're not experts in, we're all guilty of sometimes just reading the headline, moving on. We're in the generation of fast-paced information, so maybe it's a unique challenge to a site commerce to out clickbait some of these fear-mongering titles, like top 10 things clean beauty movement doesn't want you to know. Like I don't know, I think the only way to really push for change is to what sometimes Victoria and I call the breadcrumb trail, like make things fun, give accurate but bite-sized information, kind of like lure people into the world of science and critical thinking. And it's just the reality of where we are right now. It's frustrating, but sometimes to me, it's also kind of fun. There are days that there are certain topics Victoria and I avoid talking about because it is very nuanced and just really hard to present in the right way in just an Insta post, much less like a Twitter post or whatnot. And sometimes it takes us a lot of time and energy just to break something down in a fun way. But it's just something that you have to do now to get anywhere. And the more people are aware, the more likely we move to a place where people hopefully get back to critical thinking.
I just want to recommend a book by Carl Sagan that I read that I think that the world would be a better place if everyone just read it. It was a demon haunted world, science in the as a candle in the look up demon haunted world. I forget that there was a specific point about science, but it's all about the need for science literacy and critical thinking and the decline and why it matters. It was a really good book that holds up the test of time, I think. But Nikki, do you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to. It's a big topic, and like I agree with you, Jen, that the entire industry of journalism and just how we consume media is completely changing and transforming, especially with the growth of platforms like TikTok and even Instagram and all of that, and how we as consumers want to receive and digest news and information is different now. So that's not going away. So I think it was Victoria's point, people want quick, digestible content, and the reality is that when it comes to science, oftentimes to Victoria's point, it's more nuanced than that. So I think that does present an exciting and interesting challenge for science communicators and just social, like people who are on social media talking about skincare. At the end of the day, I do think that social media platforms need to be held accountable for misinformation spreading on their own platforms. That is their responsibility. They are creating that space. And I also think as consumers, you need to be responsible for how you yourself contribute to that spread of misinformation by sharing that sensational content. And I've said this before, Jen, I think on your previous podcast, you have the power to stop the spread of misinformation. So if you see something that is alarming or seems a little off, I think maybe questioning that content before you start hitting the share, like, comment button is your first step, I would say, as a consumer, because the more people that share that type of stuff, the more misinformation spreads like wildfire.
And last but not least, Esther.
Actually, I don't really have anything else to add on. I feel like everybody made pretty great points and was saying what I was thinking.
Okay, well, Julia, Ruby, do you have something to add in or ask?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a counterpoint to something that Nikki said earlier. I think it's kind of been touched on already, but I I read, I think it was a post by Hank Green several years ago, where he said, if you see something online that you think is wrong, but you don't think you're qualified to comment on it, that's a sign that you really should be commenting on it. And I think maybe if a dermatologist gets asked to comment on something that really a toxicologist should be commenting on, for example, instead of just turning it down and probably another dermatologist accepts the request for an interview, they could um, take the interview and then sort of talk about how this isn't really something people should be listening to a dermatologist on, and it's kind of try and get that across that maybe people need to listen to toxicologists more, or something like that. And I do certainly see the appeal in turning down interview requests, and I don't want to suggest that anyone is obligated to take an interview request if they feel they're not qualified to comment on something. But I don't know, it's just another perspective to think on, is that probably not everyone is going to be turning down those requests, unfortunately, who's not qualified.
I actually love, like, I love that point. I think that's such an excellent suggestion. So thanks for sharing it. I think you make an excellent point. Like, to that point, if there's a dermatologist who might turn it down because they're doing the ethical and right thing, there's another one waiting through the door who might take it. And you're right. If there is someone who would use that opportunity to educate people on who the right experts are for those things, I think that's such a great suggestion.
I just think that it's difficult because the journalist is looking for a quote to fit into their article. So I don't know if like a kind of a halfway point is kind of suggesting to the journalist, hey, I don't think I'm the best person. I suggest this toxicologist, and maybe they can get a better sense of information. But I agree. I think in an ideal world, that would be a nice way to go about it. I just think a reporter, if they're in their mind, if they're looking for a dermatologist, they're going to want a dermatologist to comment on the topic. And I think as a physician, it's kind of an issue of losing face too, where you don't want to appear like you don't know what you're talking about, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Agree with that point. And I feel like Michelle and especially Jen have definitely pointed out how I know when she doesn't know something, that you will tag someone who might have like better knowledge about the topic. And then I know Michelle because she was frustrated with how derms get like coded on something like toxicology, and she kind of said that it's not their scope of practice to be talking about things like that. So, but I pretty much what I'm trying to say, everyone's been bringing up really great points, and unfortunately, it's going to continue to happen. Like as much as we don't like want it to, where people are commenting on things that's not their scope of practice. But also, I think it's a great dialogue to have too, where consumers or even other experts can be like, hey, maybe you should refer to this person for this specific aspect, like let's say cosmetic chemistry or toxicology, and just like ask them to refer to like the appropriate experts. I feel like the more that it happens, and maybe we'll see that shift occur.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's a lot of it is that people don't want to lose face. Like, oh, if someone's viewing me as an expert, I need to live up to that expectation. So I think it can be quite difficult for people's egos, I guess. I mean, I definitely do it. I will refer out to other people, and I think Jen also does a really good job of doing that. Yeah, it's just, I think it's really personality dependent too, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, if it is a phenomena, which is contested, I suppose, but the Dunning-Kruger effect, if it is a phenomena, seems to affect people who are more educated, maybe even more, because then you get into this like mindset that, well, I'm an expert, so then I must know more about this other area. Not that you're like definitely going to do this, but I find sometimes when you have expertise, it's easy to kind of like prop yourself up and feel like you're an expert in more than you actually are, until someone points it out, and then you're like, oh shoot, I actually didn't know that. I feel like it takes self-awareness of your own expertise, and I feel like some people don't have that self-awareness. Or maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe this is too generous of me to say that. Maybe they do, and they're just like trying to be famous or something. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think social media really takes away the barriers that a traditional, like, I don't know, like traditionally, I feel like journalists would go to like an academic institution and say, who's your expert on whatever, psoriasis? And then, the department would say, I'm going to forward you to Dr. So-and-so. He's our expert in the department. But I think with social media, the access to physicians has gotten so much greater. And, I've talked to other dermatologists about this, but the majority of people on social media are trainees still.
Yeah.
A lot of them are dermatology residents, meaning if they're a first-year resident, they haven't really seen patients on their own. So it's like the information they're giving also is like, it can be a little bit questionable because they don't necessarily have the clinical experience to be saying the things that they're saying. So it's a whole slippery slope, I think.
I was actually gonna just chime in real quick and also just really agree with Dr. Jean on that sentiment, just because I don't think the average journalist understands like the layers of expertise like within, if you want to say like within beauty, then it's already like pretty niche. And we kind of struggle with that a lot because like for example, Gloria and I, we always love to tell people, like, do not come to us with your pregnancy questions. Like, we're not the right experts. And then, we see that there's an education piece for every, I guess, department, in terms of, as formulators, even just like within like formulation science, it can become very, there are certain things in terms of like, for example, hair that, with even like years of someone who's just getting into hair as a hair chemist versus someone who's like been in hair for 10 years, like all the experts are different. And I cannot fathom a journalist being able to understand like how to even navigate or find their network, and it just kind of adds to the difficulty of like press needing pieces done now, needing like a response ASAP. It's just, I don't know. I don't know if they'll ever have the bandwidth to even try to organize their experts and know like which.
Oh no, Victoria, you cut out. But I think we got the gist of your point, which was really good. Yeah, it's a really hard time to be a journalist. Not having enough time to thoroughly vet pieces, not getting paid that much, having to publish so quickly. Yeah, that would be really, really hard. So, yeah, totally to everything that you just said. Connor, do you have a question or comment that you'd like to add in? If you're speaking, I can't hear you. Esther, I feel like you know the speaking tricks. I don't know them. What do you do when you have a hard time speaking on this?
I just changed the speaker. If you like swipe up, actually, I don't know if you have an iPhone or not, but I have an iPhone and there's like a little bar, and I swipe up, and it's like right under the microphone and like those three symbols, and we're not. And there's like a section where you can change your audio output, and I changed it to speaker. I don't know if they have an iPhone though.
Nikki, did you have a suggestion?
Honestly, Jen, I don't. I don't even know how to use Discord. That's why I'm always messaging you how to use this platform. I have no idea.
Julia Ruby knows how to use Discord the best of everyone here. Julia, if you have any suggestions, feel free to
Why
let
don't they
us
type the
know.
question? They could type the question.
Oh yeah, Connor, if you'd like to type your question or comment in the webinar chat text channel, then I will read it aloud. Sorry. Also though, if it starts working, then it kind of looks like I think it's working. I can hear you now. I don't know what you did,
Okay,
but it's
amazing.
working.
So I don't really want to like fully disrupt the like flow of the conversation. Obviously, I realize I'm not one of the people that was originally meant to be here, but I think that, you know, more generally speaking around the subject of misinformation, I was reading an article not too long ago, which kind of sought to address the whole issue of debunking misinformation, but like on a more personal level. So the subject matter there was like, you know, COVID-19 and people discussing the quote unquote risks around vaccination and such. And they were talking about how in many cases the impetus is kind of on the family member or the friend to, you know, communicate to people that either don't recognize their own limitations in terms of understanding. So maybe you don't recognize, I guess, you know, to use a term that is familiar with a lot of people, like the wheelhouse, like where is your wheelhouse? What are you qualified to form an opinion on? Using the fact that you are somebody that has a personal relationship with somebody can be really valuable. But I guess to give a really like basic example, I'm not technically a qualified professional in terms of, you know, skincare. I'm not an esthetician, not a dermatologist, nothing like that. But I spend a lot of time, I mean, at this point, years learning about it. So I've faced a similar question, you know, like when people come to me for advice, and then I hear people say, well, I can't give anybody any advice unless I've had like, you know, an hour-long consultation. So if you're trying to straddle the line between recognizing that somebody might not be able, you know, either for financial reasons or for logistical reasons, whatever the case is, to seek out what would be a professional opinion, and maybe it's not even logistical or financial, maybe it's intellectual or personal, like they simply aren't somebody that could effectively receive input from a professional. I guess that's kind of hard to explain, but in cases like that, I guess I was just hoping to maybe get some insight around what you guys think would be, you know, like best practices in situations like that. Not necessarily in terms of skincare, but, you know, more broadly.
This is actually a really good question. What I know social media has like its ups and downs, but I do want to say that the influx of professionals coming onto social media has definitely made I would say skincare more accessible, especially for people that do have concerns and that they don't have access to. I would even say, let's say financial, they don't have financial access to see a dermatologist or esthetician, et cetera, et cetera. I think that social media has definitely made it accessible for people to get some of their questions addressed, even if some of the advice is general, because it does give them some starting point to go off of. So I think, oh my God, sorry, I cannot speak right now. If, let's say, one of my friends was like really had some questions, and let's say if I wasn't a professional, I would say find if I knew some experts, let's say I refer them to Jen if they had questions about like sustainability or cosmetic chemistry. I would say Victoria and Gloria, or like let's say product recommendations. I would say Nikki. So I think social media is definitely, it's beneficial if let's say you're unable to provide the answers to your friend.
Yeah, I was going to second that, is just having kind of a set of resources available to you. So you, as somebody who has a lot of experience in this area, you kind of have a better sense of what's a reliable resource than than somebody who has never been exposed to this. So I think having a set of resources, whether it is certain accounts or people or even organizational websites that you can refer people to that are really solid resources. And again, that's what I try to do on my page, is give people the resources of databases that they can look up information on that are really reliable, because I think somebody with experience has a better sense of what's reliable and what's not. And I will say also, like what Esther was saying about giving people access to even basic information, like for me as a dermatologist, there definitely is an access problem globally. I get messages from people all the time asking me about their conditions, and I can't give personal medical advice over this platform, but I think I've gotten a lot of feedback from people saying, wow, like your step-by-step on how to use a retinoid has actually cleared up my acne. So I think that having professionals on these platforms is very helpful in terms of increasing access to kind of basic skincare and treatment with over-the-counter products.
And maybe I'll just say for at me at home when I'm not, I feel like I'm pretty good at answering people online. I sometimes struggle in person depending on their reactions. Uh I find it a lot more challenging, and I'm not as refined for this, but something that I will do if people have questions about something that I'm not as comfortable, but I know what they're saying isn't quite right. It's like specifically around a lot of what I've been seeing in my own family has been around vaccination misinformation and concerns about different things that I don't really understand the whole topic, but I have the gist, and I also know some really great accounts on social media where I know the people who I'm talking to are, and they publish in a really digestible way. So just for my sisters and my mom, who I was just with earlier today, they were commenting, and I just went and like, okay, you guys should just follow these accounts. And then the hope is my mom is currently following my account, and then she follows Science Up first. So hopefully then she gets good information in a digestible way from reliable accounts. I'm not sure if that's feasible for everyone, but just pointing people towards, this is just echoing what Esther and Aegean is saying, I suppose. But yeah, I like taken my mom's phone and put the account in, so then she sees the information, and then yeah, echoing what you guys are saying. Does anyone else want to chime in on this question?
Well, I mean, if nobody else has anything else to add, I will just say thank you for the feedback. And that was one of the main points I think that they were trying to make in the article. You know, you can obviously only do so much. I mean, specifically speaking around vaccinations, I mean, obviously the average, person, maybe even the average person reading this, this admittedly niche article, but having, a repertoire, I guess, of resources that you can direct people to, so that you're not, taking on that authority when maybe you ought not to. But absolutely, I mean, 100% thank you guys for the advice. I think it was sobering is the word I'll use.
Well, thanks for coming to the stage. And also, if anyone else has a question or comment, feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to bring you to the stage. Or you can also put it in the webinar text channel, webinar chat text channel, and then I will ask it myself. I know we're going a little over time, so just send me a message to all the panelists if you have to duck out, and then I can cut it shorter. But another issue that I see in the media is there's this perception that science doesn't know anything and that it's flip-flopping. So 1 year cholesterol is good, 1 year's cholesterol is bad, 1 year's chocolate is good for you cancer fighting or whatever they're saying, or coffee, and the next year it's not. Yeah, the topic this, I guess, point extends to a lot of different topics. So do you think that this could be a part of the growing, and do you think that it's growing, but growing mistrust of science. And I would just maybe highlight to what I've just said that this isn't really a science thing. It's more a media thing, where maybe they may be misinterpreting science and then maybe being too bold with the statements that they make. My 2 cents. But Victoria, would you like to go first for this one?
Sure. I'm gonna try to think about my general stance. I feel like in some ways, if a journalist can get someone to read about a diet paper, I feel like that might actually be a good thing. But you got to get the person to like read past the title, and that's obviously where the challenge is. And I actually love the Reddit science thread because they do such a good job of posting like some new like blueberries are healthy for you or not. And then like the comments just give me so much hope because there are people talking about how like, oh hey, just so you know, it's like funded by Big Blueberries, or the sample size is very small, and I just feel like it's moments like that where I'm like, I don't know, I can't hate on press for I guess trying to introduce some semblance of science. I agree with you, it is very disheartening when it does. Obviously it brings in the fear mongering and whatnot. So I don't know. This is not a good answer. I think I'm generally just lukewarm. I think that if you can bring in some sort of curiosity, the reader has curiosity and wants to learn more, like that's really the best. I think I would take that as a win, I guess, but maybe I'm just being just trying to see it more as like an overall positive direction. It's kind of goes in line with like the whole clean beauty aspect. Everyone, I know it is like so. It definitely grinds a few of our gears when we read, some of those. We hear about brands and articles, but at the same time, if that means that it kind of incites this general behavior of a user to start doing research, then I'm like, in some ways, I'm like, I think that's actually a good thing. So that's the way I see it. But I could also be looking at it too idealistically.
Gloria, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think the problem really stems from maybe this is just education not really doing its job. I do think most people forget what that science is a progress. It's a process. It's a way of critical thinking. It's about finding new discovery, not and so a lot of times we learn new things, and that's just science at work. And 99% of people, well, I feel like 99 maybe, hopefully that's too high of a number, but most people forget that, and they are looking for a black and white answer. And that's something I find, especially on the sunscreen topic, to be very frustrating, because on one side we're trying to calm people down and say, hey, it's not as scary as people make it out to be, keep calm, keep using sunscreen. But at the same time, like I can understand why some people reading a line like carcinogen found in yours, or like sunscreen gets in your bloodstream, but we don't know if it's bad or not, is not a very satisfying answer to most people. So I agree with what Victoria said, that maybe we just need to dial back and try to get people to be more curious about the scientific progress, and just remind people to like, take a chill pill, like just kind of learn to critically assess and not jump on sensationalist headlines. I don't know, Jen. This is a really tough topic. There's no good answer or solution to this one.
Nikki, would you like to go next?
Can you hear me now? It cut out for me. I didn't hear Gloria's reply.
I could hear you though.
Oh, okay. Weird. Okay. I'm trying to remember what the question was now, Jen, but I think I do. I think it was whether there's a growing mistrust of science, right? Is that what the question was?
And then also the perception that science is flip-flopping year over year.
Yeah.
One year
I mean,
they're saying one thing. Oh, sorry. You
Oh,
get
no,
it.
no.
Okay.
Honestly, like just so there's a few things, like a few thoughts I have on this. Overall, I think there's definitely a democratization of knowledge, which is a good thing. I think as consumers, as people, we have more access to information than we ever have before, which is good and bad. Good because if you're curious, you can do your research, you can try to get the best information possible. But it also can be bad in a sense if everybody feels like they are informed enough to make a judgment or an opinion on something that they might not have the expertise to do so. I think the whole flip flopping, I feel that way in terms of, let's say, acne. I talk a lot about acne on my platform. I would say maybe a decade ago, they said there was absolutely no link between acne and the foods that you consume. And more recently, I think there is some communication now from dermatologists and from experts saying that, well, the foods you eat won't cause your acne. They could make they could be triggers, for example, like possibly dairy or high sugar diets. So I think in that sense, like it can be overwhelming as a consumer to see such differing opinions all the time, constantly coming out. You just don't know what to trust or who to trust. So yeah, I think it's a big issue. I don't know what the solution is.
Aegean, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so kind of to comment on what Nikki was saying, I think this kind of comes back to science literacy, because going specifically to the idea or the concept of diet, acne and diet, it's not that we said there was no link, it's more that we didn't have the data. So I think that gets confused by people that are writing these pieces, that it can seem like you're flip-flopping, but it's actually that, oh, we didn't really have the data to either support or deny that hypothesis, and now we have more data to support the hypothesis. But to a layperson that may not have, and I think Gloria was saying this, that kind of mindset of scientific discovery, it can feel like, well, you said one thing and now you're saying another. But in fact, it's all very nuanced, and we're all discovering new things all the time. And I think, I think that's really one of the cores of this idea of this mistrust of science, that we don't know what we're talking about. We're always getting it wrong. And I think the more you know as a scientist, as a physician, you realize how little we know, how imprecise medicine is. And I think that with COVID, actually, I was kind of seeing a lot of lay people learning kind of the nuances of how to interpret data, the limitations of data, that guidelines can change overnight because we're learning new things. And I think everybody was very invested in that process of scientific discovery with COVID. And I feel like in the past couple of months, that's kind of flipped the other direction. And there's been a lot more mistrust of science, especially with vaccine hesitancy. I don't know the right answer. I think people with knowledge and professional integrity keep putting out information that's easily digestible, that helps people have more critical thinking, and scientific reasoning. I think we can kind of help change that perception overall. And getting comments from people that follow me, people have really questioned their beliefs in, say, clean beauty and their kind of unwavering dedication to that. So I think the more people that are doing science, SciComm, the better.
And last but not least, Esther.
I think that what some people just don't understand is that, like, science is always evolving, it's always changing. Like, decades ago, we know that people were dying, their life expectancy was very short. And then like a few decades ago, we started working on sunscreen and sun protection, and life expectancy ended up being a little bit longer, but it became a little bit better. And if we knew what we did back then, maybe the life expectancy would have been longer back then, but it wasn't. And now that with more information that we're getting and that we're learning how to improve, like, people's health, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that people just in general don't realize that things are always going to be improving. There's like some information that we don't know now that we're going to learn in the future. there's not going to be things that are always set in stone all the time. Some things really, they truly do need nuance. Like, back then, like if it wasn't for Michelle and like a lot of this debunking, we would probably think to this day that sunscreens are killing the coral reefs. But now that we have people that are putting things into better context, we know now that the impact that sunscreens have on coral reefs and the concentrations that we use these filters, they're not that bad compared to, let's say, me traveling to Hawaii or traveling all around the world has like a bigger impact. So I think that overall, people just need to have a wider lens, a wider perspective to understand that things are always going to be improving and things are always going to be changing. And the more that we know about things, it's going to be better for all of us.
Okay, so I think Gloria and Victoria have to duck out. Is that right?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
so much for having us. Another great
Enjoy the rest of your
conversation.
weekend.
Therapy session.
Yes, always. It was so nice getting to discuss this topic with you guys and hearing from everyone. But yeah, can't wait for the next one. Thank you guys.
Thanks for joining, guys. Hope you have a great rest of your Sunday.
Bye.
Bye. Take
You
care.
too. Bye.
Okay, so I guess I just have one more question for you guys since we've been now over time, partly because the shenanigans at the start. Sorry about that. So I guess the question that I will end on is, this was from Nikki. She sent this to me before. What can the everyday person do? Because obviously you can't blame the everyday person for falling for some misinformation, for feeling confused when there's things like the EWG out there that seem pretty legit, and then you have to really dig in to find out that they're not. So anyways, do you have any suggestion for the everyday person at home, considering everything that we've talked about thus far? Since this was your question, Nikki, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, my biggest suggestion, and it's the one I think I brought up on this channel before, is do your best to educate yourself to the best of your ability. So I've always loved to talk about platforms like Coursera, where you can take free courses. So I think just improving your own critical thinking skills and having access to things like Coursera, if you want to know more about science or science communication, or just if you're interested in things like chemistry or anything like that, I think taking advantage of those free resources and tools is really important. And then just always being curious. I mean, that's something that I live by myself. And I think asking questions and being curious is important as a consumer and as a person in general. So following science communicators, following experts, and just maintaining that curiosity for me is the most important. But I'd love to hear what Dr. Ejian and Esther have to say.
Maybe I'll just insert one point that I find a lot of people get really emotionally attached to the first piece of information that they receive, like this anchoring effect. And then when they see information that it goes against what they believe, they feel attacked. And so maybe my suggestion here, if you are that person, if you are seeing new information that is making you upset, because I know that some people who see my content, they feel upset by it. I would question that feeling. Why are you feeling so attacked by a piece of information? It may or may not, like, maybe the information is incorrect. But if it's not, like, well, question it and question your own thought process. That would be my big suggestion. Kind of trying to be critical of your own thinking. I think that could do a lot of people good, I guess, for navigating the information marketplace that we see. But that's my 2 cents. Gian, would you like to go next?
Sure. I definitely second what both you and Nikki have said. And just to add on to that is really try to educate people that you know. So if you're seeing sources that, might be contrary to what you're seeing in mainstream media, but seem pretty legitimate and it's kind of hard because you're kind of telling people to have their own internal censor of what's a good source and what's not. But I do think my point is I think you should share information with people and have open discussions. Don't stay in your silo. If something seems fishy or may not make sense to you, ask questions. Like Nikki said, pursue sources and try to find out what's true and what's not, but it can be really, really difficult with the way that search engines are formatted. When I try to Google what people send to me, or even clean beauty, is clean beauty good, it's very difficult to sort through what's accurate and what's not. So I think the more different perspectives you see and absorb and kind of think about and digest, the more tools you have to kind of decide for yourself what you believe, what is true and what is accurate. And I think hopefully ultimately what is actually true and accurate will come to the surface if you're keeping an open mind. Sorry, that was very convoluted, but it's a difficult world to wade in, I think.
Yeah. Esther, would you like to go next? I guess last but not least.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everybody said, and I definitely suggest people to don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's like a really big part of like critical thinking. Not only asking questions to yourself, but asking questions to people that are saying things that you might find questionable or or think that is true. And I think my most recent example was I was talking to you, Jen, and Michelle, like I think a couple of days ago, because someone posted like a reel saying that moisturizers with SPF are dangerous. And I was kind of just like, where did they hear this from? And I was looking at the comments, and people were asking like, why are moisturizers with SPF dangerous? And the person that posted the question, posted the reel, wasn't responding to anybody that was asking this question. So I mean, if I was like a consumer that didn't have any education in skincare or anything like that, and I was following this person that posted something that caused like a lot of fear, I definitely want to like look at other sources to see, to open my lens, open my perspective on if moisturizers with SPF are actually dangerous or if they're not. So overall, like I was saying, definitely follow different sources and don't be afraid to ask questions, even to yourself and how you think.
I think that's a great place to end this chat on. Thank you for sticking around for an hour and a half for this chat. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you guys have any suggestions for a topic, I think we're going to be doing them at this time now, on Sundays at probably 6 p.m., maybe even 7, for the rest of the summer. For probably the foreseeable future. Esther, you'll have to let me know how long. And yeah, so if you have any questions any topics, suggestions for the future, leave it in the webinar chat text channel and we'll take it up for consideration, or send a DM to either myself or Esther. And then we will also consider it there. But thank you to our panelists, and